everyone, and welcome into Weather Classroom. I'm meteorologist Thomas Patrick, back after my Thanksgiving break, and hopefully you had a fantastic holiday as well. So we're going to go right back into some really cool and educational topics every Thursday at 1 p.m. Pacific time, as you're seeing live right now. This week's topic is one of my favorites. It's actually not weather related, it's astronomy related, and it's on eclipses. And that's actually because we had a penumbral lunar eclipse a couple weekends ago, and there's actually a total solar eclipse of the sun this upcoming weekend, not in the US though, so I don't want to get everybody's hopes up too much overall, but I'm going to be talking about all the different types of both lunar eclipses and solar eclipses, and when the US is going to be getting the next of each of those. And it's obviously a very exciting experience. I think many of us have probably seen a lunar eclipse in our lifetime, but the solar eclipse is actually a bit more rare, and I'm going to discuss just why that is as well. So again, welcome everybody into Weather Classroom. I'm meteorologist Thomas Patrick. If you are loving these educational topics every Thursday, please make sure to hit the like button and support me, and support, of course, this video as well. So thanks again for tuning in. All right, let's jump into our topic. First of all, what are eclipses? Eclipses is what is the phenomenon that occurs from our viewing on Earth of just how the moon and how the sun react. Basically, if we're all lined up in an exact straight line, and diagram here, not exactly to scale, but when we are lined up in a straight line, we get an eclipse of one of two variety. In the way you see it here, where the Earth is in between the sun and the moon, then the Earth's shadow falls on the moon, giving us the lunar eclipse. Now, if you actually move the moon over in between the sun and the Earth, then it's the moon's shadow that's projected on Earth, and that gives us a solar eclipse because it looks like the sun is being obscured by the moon. And I know that's a lot of talk, but I'll show you how these shadows and these diagrams work out. And I want to start with the lunar eclipses first. So as I have it laid out here, it's basically the Earth's shadow gets projected on the moon. And basically, if you take some lines from the edge of the sun, kind of run it right past the edge of the Earth, we get actually two different kinds of shadows. We get an Umbra, which is the inner shadow, and the Penumbra, which is the outer shadow. What does that look like? I wish I had my flashlight here. In fact, I'll use one of my cool studio lights here. If this is the sun, basically the Umbra is if the entirety of that light is blocked out, we would be in the Umbra of this light here. But if it's only like partially blocked out, we're getting a little bit of the shadow, like the outer shadow, but not the complete shadow. So that would be the Penumbra, where you could still see part of the light, just not all of it. And of course, if you don't see any of it, then then you're not eclipsed at all. So that's the best I can do just from the comfort of my seat here. So that's kind of how the sun and the Earth and the moon are reacting in one another. So as we look at lunar eclipses, essentially there's like this cone of Earth's shadow that's in the path of the moon's orbit. And as the moon moves into that inner shadow, the Umbra, that's when we get the total lunar eclipse. If it only partially gets into the Umbra, that's partial. And if we don't get into the inner shadow, if we only get to that outer shadow, you get a penumbral eclipse. And that's actually three different kinds of lunar eclipses that we can see. So here's just how they look like in the diagram. And actually it was right at the end of last month. I believe it was November 30th. There was a penumbral lunar eclipse for the US. I like to call that the lame eclipse because it's the one that doesn't really look like very much. The only part of the Earth's shadow is on the moon, but still the entire moon is illuminated. So it's just a slightly dimmer full moon than normal, and that's basically what we had. But a partial lunar eclipse is when the inner shadow, the Umbra, starts obscuring the moon completely. And then the total lunar eclipse is when it projects red, which you might think is kind of unusual. Look at the partial eclipse. You basically can't see part of the moon. So if the moon is completely engulfed in the shadow of Earth, how can we still see the moon? And it's actually because the sun's rays get refracted around Earth's atmosphere, and then actually get projected into that inner shadow part, which is why it looks red. It's basically the same effect as the sunrise and the sunset looking red, making the atmosphere look red. Well, the same effect is happening. And in fact, it's basically the entire Earth's sunrises and sunsets all at the same time are being projected onto the moon's surface. And that's why it looks that very rustic, orangish, reddish color during the middle of a lunar eclipse. Really cool stuff. And it's actually very common as well, because in any kind of lunar eclipse, when it occurs, basically half of the Earth gets to see it. So a whole lot of people get an opportunity to see the lunar eclipse. I've seen it probably a dozen times myself, even just in my lifetime. Really awesome event. This was the last time that I saw it, which was while I was here in Spokane. In fact, it was the first month that I was here. January 20th, 2019, we had that lunar eclipse. I know it looks a little bit hazy. I actually had to hold my camera so steady to try to get that exposure shot. So if I had another chance, I have a tripod now. So if the next time around, which actually will be in May of next year, we'll make sure to have some better pictures. Or at least I'm going to get a better picture. And I know there's a lot of fantastic photographers in the inland Northwest. But now let's move on to solar eclipses, because this is the really cool one. And if you get a chance to see a total solar eclipse, it is very much like it's like a destination. Like I have to travel to go see it. And a lot of people did back in 2017. So in this case, the moon is in between the sun and the Earth. And there's this curious little phenomenon. And it's almost a miracle, if you will, that the sun is 400 times larger than the moon, but the moon is 400 times closer to the Earth than the sun. And that perfect alignment gives us just an awesome display. And honestly, you might be hard pressed to find this anywhere else in the universe. It is obviously so rare to have this perfect alignment between the moon and the sun's size and distance, that we get these solar eclipses on this grand scale. And it's that perfect alignment that gives us a very rare but incredible sight. You get to see the sun's corona, which is the outer atmosphere of the sun, shimmering around the moon during a total solar eclipse. But obviously it is very rare. So if you get that alignment, and if you're in the right place at the right time, you get to see that absolutely grand sight. And then, it only lasts a couple minutes at best in these scenarios. But there are 3 different types of solar eclipses. There's also the partial, which is where the sun is partially covered up by the moon. The total, which I mentioned, which is that grand display where you get to see the outer atmosphere of the sun. But there's this third one, and I'm sorry that I'm actually covering it up here. It's called an annular eclipse. And because the moon's orbit around the sun is not a perfect circle, it's a little elliptical, that 400 times closer, sometimes it's the moon's a little bit closer, but sometimes it's a little farther away. And actually, when the moon is a little bit farther away, it appears a little bit smaller in the sky, to the point where it actually can't 100% cover up the sun. And we get this really weird but really cool sight where the sun becomes just a ring. And it's sometimes described as a ring of fire, but it's an annular eclipse would be the technical term for that. It's actually not quite as grand of a display as the total eclipse of the sun, but still pretty cool as well. I should mention this before I go into my experience with the solar eclipse. But there's a solar eclipse this weekend. It is on I can't remember if it's the 13th. It's the 14th. It's the 14th, so I would be on the 13th or 14th. Now I can't remember. I can't remember at the top of my head. But it is this weekend. It's either Sunday or Monday. I'll have to double check really quick here. Let's see here. I swear it's the 14th, which would make it Monday. Yes, it's the 14th. So it's going to be Monday. So not exactly this weekend. Monday of next week, there's the total solar eclipse. And the blue line that you see here on the diagram is the path of the shadow of the solar eclipse. And notice how narrow it is. In fact, it's so narrow and it's so precise that it only hits the countries of Chile and Argentina. And actually, it doesn't even go lengthwise. It just goes perpendicular across South America. So only a few people that are stationed there or living there in that area are going to see the total solar eclipse for this upcoming Monday. And everywhere else in kind of those outer lines, those are partial parts of the solar eclipse. Different intensities, 80%, 60%, all the way down to 1%, if you will. So that's upcoming this weekend. So we're not going to get it in the U.S., unfortunately, but it does occur every once in a while. In fact, the last time that we had a total solar eclipse was back in 2017. And for this, I was living in Illinois, but I wasn't living in the right part of Illinois. I had to drive three hours to the south to Carbondale, Illinois, which is where Southern Illinois University is. And that's the site that I got to see myself, the total solar eclipse of the sun. That's actually the very end of it, where you get what's called the diamond ring effect, where the first sun's rays start to peek back out from behind the moon. Really incredible stuff. I wish it weren't as cloudy as it was for that day. And I know a lot of people living in Washington got to see a partial solar eclipse, because this one went from coast to coast. But if you were in Washington, you didn't get to see the total solar eclipse. But I'm sure a lot of people may have traveled to Oregon to get a glimpse of it for themselves. So when's the next time we're going to get a solar eclipse in the U.S.? And it's actually there's actually two answers to that question. And the first is in 2023. I believe this will be October 14th. I don't know what day of the week that is, but we have an annular solar eclipse. So as mentioned, that's the ring around the sun. It's actually in this diagram here, where the moon doesn't quite cover up the entire sun, so we get a ring of fire. We don't get to see the sun's corona, which is the outer atmosphere, but we get to see this really cool sight. And again, it will be in Oregon, not Washington, and travel into Texas. So Oregon, Nevada, Utah, New Mexico, Texas, primarily the states that are going to see this next annular eclipse. But what about the total solar eclipse? That's going to be in 2024. And if you're living in Washington, you'll have to travel just a little bit farther this time around, because this is going to be from Texas up to Maine. It's not going to be a West Coast thing. It's not like back in 2017 when it went from coast to coast, from Oregon to South Carolina. No, this time it's going to go from Texas to Maine. And the ironic thing is that I was stationed here in Carbondale, Illinois, the only city that gets both of these eclipses, the one back in 2017 and the upcoming one in 2024. In fact, it's pretty much right in the middle of this path here. So that was really cool to be a part of that, as they labeled themselves the Eclipse Crossroads of America, because if you line the two eclipse paths together, they actually intersect in that city. Really cool stuff. So might have to make plans a couple years from now to go see this total solar eclipse of the sun. And as for that lunar eclipse, we actually don't have to wait as long. I think I have the diagram right here. In this case, you're looking for not the black area, but the areas in white. That's where the total lunar eclipse will be visible. It's going to be visible up to moon set, which would be first thing in the morning on May 26th of 2021. That'll be the next lunar eclipse visible for the entire western U.S., not as much in the eastern U.S. They only get to see the beginning of the eclipse, and then the sun will rise, and then the moon will set. But for us, we'll get to see the total lunar eclipse, and then the red moon is going to sink below the horizon, giving way to the sunrise and to the dawn hour. So that'll be a really cool experience as well. So we got a couple eclipses coming up. So that was a really cool topic, and I know I probably threw a lot of information at you. And if you have any questions about any science topic, especially on eclipses, I could just go on for days and days about this stuff. You can always hit me up by either dropping me a direct message or even leaving a comment below. But to recap our weather classroom for today, 3 types of lunar eclipses: penumbral, partial, and total. And total is the cool one. And in solar eclipses, there's 3 varieties: partial, annular, and total. And total is also the best in that case as well. So if you're living in the US, the next lunar eclipse is going to be May 26th of 2021, only 6 months from now, which actually lines up with, we usually get them 6 months apart. Lunar eclipses and solar eclipses tend to come in pairs. And then the next total solar eclipse will be April 8th of 2024. So yeah, that's it for me. And that's it for Weather Classroom. And I hope that you get excited about not just these weather topics, but astronomy topics as well. I'm obviously very much interested in seeing the next total solar eclipse as well. I'm going to be making plans, and whether I'm working for it or I'm taking vacation for it, I'm definitely going to go see it a couple years from now. So hopefully you'll be as excited as me about it as well. But that'll do it for me today. Thanks again for watching Weather Classroom. We'll be back next Thursday for another topic, which is to be determined. And of course, if you have a topic that you'd like me to answer and to go in depth on, make sure to hit me up just by dropping me a comment or a direct message as well. Thanks again to everybody. That'll be it for today. I'll see you next Thursday. Have a great day, everyone, and have a great weekend. Stay safe and stay well out there.